how can I keep these boys on task working individually when I need to pull a small group aside for more in-depth instruction? So, man, I think we needed a podcast or we have a resource, I think, on this, but because I do think small group instruction, the ability to pull kids and have the rest of the class work is sometimes it feels like a holy grail, but it's like really is important. And it basically I think what it requires is just kind of crazy strictness. You know what I mean? A little bit. Like you kind of have to really just be really firm. And like I think that starts with recognizing in your mind, like, I need to be able to do this. Like I need to be able to help these students. And so the other students have to be focused and they have to behave. And so like if that mandates me being like crazy strict in this, it's just worth it because this has to be. So I think like having almost even like a separate expectation, like a more strict expectation of like, okay, this is our normal class thing. But when I'm doing this, and I would have this conversation with them basically like, when I'm pulling kids, like I have to be able to help you guys. And I can't when the rest of the class isn't. And so where this is going to be a really serious thing that when we enter and maybe have a name for it so they understand like we're at this other level. The expectations have just upped because I got to be able to pull these people and this is what I need you guys to do during this time. And you might have procedures during that time for, well, what if someone that's working silently needs help? Maybe they put their name on the board. And then you go in, you pause and go answer their questions and come back. So you want to think through that. Is if they need help, how do they handle that? Um, do you want them to work silently? Are they allowed to work with a partner? But what does that look like? And then I would definitely practice it before you try to pull small groups. So before you ever try to pull small groups, plan times where I'm not pulling, I'm just practicing. And you tell them that we are going to practice what this looks like, and you are just a hawk. Like you are just crazy on it and just really trying to firm up those expectations. I do that once or twice. And then I would kind of do like a half where you're pulling kids, but your priority isn't the pulling kids yet. Your priority is still to be a hawk. And then gradually, hopefully getting to the point where you can pull them with that. So those are a few thoughts there. Do you have anything to add to that, Becky?
That practice before you actually pull groups was exactly what I was going to say. That is a huge key to success in getting pulling small groups with independent work happening elsewhere to actually function in a classroom, because otherwise it just falls apart.
Yeah, I mean, it's so essential because otherwise you are rightly focusing on the group, but then as soon as you do that, you lose them, and it's like they need that practice. You have to really establish that first, and
And I
it'll
would,
pay off later.
yes, yes, it will. And I would even say maybe an intermediary step between the hawk and the partial group pull of like you're the hawk, and then you just try to step back to your desk for one of the
Hmm.
sessions and you're just doing your work and you are aware, but you're not
It's
physically telling
present.
kids you're well aware, so you're watching, you're listening very, very carefully, but they don't feel that. And so that way you can test like how close are we? Can I actually pull this off if I'm like you are totally hyper aware but not walking around the room. You are totally hyper aware but not making eye contact with them all the time and reminding them with gestures to get back on task so that they get used to again, you aren't needing to be a hawk for them to stay on task when they're working independently because otherwise it's not fully independent yet. And also honestly, this practice sometimes needs to be redone, like after a break, especially having that, okay, we're going to do small group time where I don't have a group and you reset that norm during those tough times where they've forgotten.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I love that idea, Becky. And while you were saying that, one other thing popped in my mind is I also wouldn't recommend going right to like 30 minutes of this. Like I would start with way smaller. Like maybe you just start with 5 minutes. Like we're going to practice 5 minutes and then maybe 10 minutes. And maybe I'm only pulling small groups for 5 to 10 minutes at first because I do think some of that, like if you like you're not only you, but it's like you're trying to teach them to really focus, to really not get off track. And I think setting a smaller amount is more realistic. And once they're used to that, then you can expand it. So I think keeping an end goal, obviously, you want to have these longer times to be able to pull small groups, but keeping just that goal of like you can get there probably more successfully by not trying to jump right there.
I would
Depends
also
on
say, oh,
the
sorry.
ability of your students, but
A really effective way to do this as well would be, since you do have that chunk of kids who are the strugglers, having them be one of your first small groups that you pull would be really effective because it gives the rest of the class the ability to norm themselves without other people who are trying to get them off task because those people are with you. And so you have them on task with you, and that will help everybody else establish this, okay, this is what this looks and feels like, and then they can resist that peer pressure when those more difficult students re-enter the independent workforce, so to speak.
I love that idea. So that one's rather that would just to, I'm going to recap that. So rather than the first time you pull, maybe rather than pulling like the lower academic kids, you're pulling the lower behavior kids as a practice step, and they could use you could practice whatever you want with them. I love that. That's a great idea.